one of our fears about the interpretation of rigor, that term, is that people are going to think that rigor resides in the text. But rigor doesn't reside in the text, it's in what you do with it. If you look at a barbell, it is whatever it weighs, 100 pounds, 150 pounds, but there's no rigor in there. The rigor comes when you lift it. The rigor comes in lifting the appropriate weight, the appropriate number of times, the appropriate number of days out of the week. It's in the action, and the same is true of reading. If you give a kid an extraordinarily difficult text, you will have made his day painful, his work hard, but it won't be rigorous. He'll be looking at the text thinking, what does this word mean? How is this sentence put together? Why are we going on page after page with no break? And that's hard, but it's not rigorous because he's not dealing with the issues, the questions, the conflicts, the ethical dilemmas characters face, whatever it is the text presents. That's where the rigor comes in, when you analyze the ideas, respond to them, sort them out, perhaps change your own mind, your own thinking about some issue that's presented. It's in all of that activity, those processes, that the rigor resides, not in the barbell or in the words on the page.
You know, one of the terms that we're all hearing right now is text-dependent, and particularly text-dependent questions. Mm-hmm. And when we think about rigor, some people are interpreting that also to mean that the teacher ought to be leading students through more and more difficult questions. And while there is certainly value in the question that the teacher might pose to the student and to the student about the text, we think that there's a lot more value in the student being in charge of asking the questions, in the student generating the questions. And I have a fear that in this time of text-dependent questions, we could create a generation of teacher-dependent kids. And what I like about Notice and Note is the questions are for the kids. They are in the kids' heads. They're the ones who are in charge of asking those questions.
When I started teaching, that's exactly what I did. My lesson planning consisted of writing a long sequence of questions, carefully structured to lead a kid from this point to that point to the next one to the conclusion, so that at the end he would say, thus I see in this poem, and he would say virtually the same thing I had written down in my notes. And what I failed to recognize was that these were all my questions. I wasn't giving the kid a tool to use. I was taking on the full responsibility for the structure of the discussion, when I should have been transferring a lot of that to him. I should have been putting upon his back the burden, first of all, of noticing something, and then the burden of raising a question. That's why we finally concluded, with the help of a teacher, Jen Ochoa, who pointed out to us that her kids couldn't remember 5 or 10 questions to ask. So she suggested that we reduce that to one question. You notice something, reduce it to one powerful question. And if you do that, the child can gradually take that question into himself and make it his own and use it as a tool when he or she addresses a text. Essentially, we're trying to get kids to pay attention, to notice those high points and low points in texts that mark some important moment, and we're trying to give them a tool, a question to use to dig into the text at that point. And we're trying to develop those as intellectual habits. And we're trying to bring to bear upon texts intellectual processes that they use anyway, that they can be trained to bring to that text.
And that kids don't need the teacher to be there. I mean, we have we as a nation of teachers have a lot of strategies we use to help kids get into a text. And we have a lot of strategies that we use when kids have finished the text to help them think about what's gone on in that text. What we wanted was to develop the strategies kids could use on their own when they're away from school, when they don't have that teacher, that are still pushing them to think at a deeper level.